In this next video or two, they should be short, I want to go over a couple things that I might have mentioned in the previous videos and not finished. One of the things was when the last video left off, I was scanning through my frames, my timeline, to help anyone out who might be having any problems. So I'd like to finish that, but before I do, I'd like to show you an error that I found, very small one in mine. But you know, in all of your animations you want a professional look and continuity, very consistent. So you don't want any items that's always been in the top left corner to all of a sudden just bounce a little bit on one frame. And you also want very consistent looking transitions, and that's where I found a little bit of an issue. So let me show you what I found and we'll fix it. So what you'll see here is when it goes into from masking into shape tweening, there's a blink or a flash back that occurs right there. And if we scrub the playhead back and forth or use the comma and the period keys, we can see what's happening is that the mask becomes its darkest right there, and then it starts to come back and the same thing is showing. So I just need to make sure that the mask, this part in the, and I'm saying mask, I should be saying that the fades this spot should occur right here when the text is first introduced. So all I need to do is just do a series of F5s until the darkest part of the mask lines up there, and it looks like I'm really, just maybe like 2 frames off. So I'll do a Shift F5 and a Shift F5. Off. I somehow was only off by 1 frame, so 1 more F5. Perfect. So now we won't see that anymore. It'll go from there. It's almost completely faded out. When it completely fades out, that's where the text comes in, and when it starts to come back or into full view, perfection. Okay, the other thing that I did was I realized that this button was too quirky when it went to white when you hovered over it, because it almost felt like you lost it. So I just changed it to black in there, and I did that just simply by going into the library for the hamburger button, double clicking on it, going over to this second state here, double clicking on it takes me 1 further in on the breadcrumbs into the group. Remember, that was created in Illustrator, and then just into properties and selecting the paint bucket, and that changes the color. Everything's a push and a pull on the timeline, so you'll see our blink comes back a little bit later here, and that's because I forgot about keeping track of what was happening down the timeline when I was doing my F5s. So just a matter of going to that area now, and let's just count and see how many we're off by. So it should be its darkest right there where the text comes in. Obviously it's not. So if I hit the period key, it's off by 1, 2, 3. So I should be able to do Shift F5, 1, 2, 3. Try that out again. Looks like it's great. And I mean, this is kind of a good advertisement for doing everything on its own layer. You know, if we had a layer for each one of the different fades, it would be a little cumbersome as far as file space or layer space, but we always could put it into a folder, and then we wouldn't have to worry about that. And if we're lucky, we move this by just the right amount. So let's try that out. That's where the text comes in. Yeah, looks like that one's still good, at least in my case. But start from the left, work to the right. Another thing that I mentioned along the way was converting a symbol from say a regular graphic symbol into a movie clip symbol. And I think that when we went from worm to worm static, we worked off of a copy. But let's make one more copy just so I can give you like full range of things that could save you some time working with symbols via converting and or copying them. So if I control or right click on worm static, I have choices here of, I can rename it, I can delete it, I can duplicate it. So to convert it, you would first duplicate it, and then you have this choice of what type of symbol it's going to be. But let's just make kind of a, and actually let's do this with the regular worm. So I'm going to right click on the regular worm, I'm going to duplicate it, and we'll call this worm with a face. Still going to be a graphic. So I'll get around to like showing you how to convert it in a second, but let's just do something kind of bizarre here. Let's add another layer to this worm, and be careful here. I was just about to add another layer and I realized we're still working inside a worm. So even though we made a duplicate copy, it doesn't automatically take you to that duplicate copy. So we actually need to go into worm face, click there, and then now we're inside of that one. Now we'll go ahead, add the new layer, and just have a little bit of bizarre fun with this. So I'm going to just draw a little face on the guy, and what you'll quickly realize working with these animated symbols is there's animation going on in them. So the face is there, but when the worm starts moving, face doesn't move with it automatically. So what I did was I outlined all of this, turned it into a symbol, which there it is, face. It's just a static graphic symbol. And then I tried to keep my keyframes lined up, hoping that I can get away with that. You know, if not, I might have had to have like 5 keyframes even here to track the face, but luckily it worked out fine. All I had to do was go over here, move it to the left, twist it a little bit so that it stays at the same angle with this face, and then the last frame is the same as the first frame. And then if I just click, shift click, right click, put in a classic tween, I now have the face following it. And again, I'm working inside of this copy that I just made. So now let's pretend that we want to use that out on the main timeline. And so what I did was I just created a temporary layer here for it. And I'm just going to bring out an instance of the worm with the face. And if we preview the movie, you can see he's there and he just sits there. But what if we wanted him to inch up and down, just like this guy's rocking back and forth? Well, that's where we would say, oops, I should have made that a movie clip. Can I go back and make it a movie clip? Well, let's give that a try. So we'll click on it, right click, and there's this thing in here called properties. So we'll choose properties, and we'll take the type and change it to a movie clip. Now in previous versions this didn't work very well, so let's see if they've cleaned it up. So now we'll do a command return. No. See, I don't know. Adobe sometimes, you know, they have all this stuff that they tell you that you can do, so let's find a workaround. Before we go to the workaround, let's give Adobe one more chance here. Let's just say, what happens if we delete this and then just bring out a fresh copy? That wouldn't be too bad if that worked. Command return, and it did. So the property change in here did actually work. Maybe I was a little too harsh on Adobe, but in a perfect world, all we would have to do is a command return, and this instance would know that it's a movie clip and work. But it didn't work, so big deal. All we had to do was just replace it with a fresh copy of it, and that did work. If that did not still work, then what we'd have to do is make a copy from scratch, or even try our luck with making a copy here, because remember we could do this, right click on it. In fact, let's go to the one that's not a movie clip yet. Let's go to just regular worm. I won't actually do this because it would mess up my whole video, but we could go to duplicate and then here choose movie clip, and that might work. And let's say that didn't work for you. Then all you'd have to do is go to insert new symbol right from scratch and have done a copy and paste of the content on worm, and then just paste it in here like we've done before. So a lot of different options there to save you a little bit of time. Last thing to talk about before we wrap this up and I run through my entire timeline with you is if you do make a mask where you have multiple pieces making up the mask. And let me just do a preview so you can see what this is. I just did a mask for this temporary worm here. And there's a column here, 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 and here. So only where the columns are do we see the worm, right? So there's a column there. Now, potentially, and in previous versions, if you went in and you accidentally nudged one of these, the whole thing would stop working, the whole mask. So what they recommend you do is just select all the pieces of the mask, go up to Modify, to Combine Objects, and select Union. And then what that does is it puts them in one big block, and then if you move them, then you know, there's supposedly no chance that it'll mess up the masking. So that's just, you know, one of those like things that if you do use a mask this way as opposed to the way I showed you, just be aware that you should do that. Now, before I show you the timeline, let me clean this stuff up so we don't need this mask or this temporary layer. We've got extra stuff in the library that we don't really need. But you know what? Actually, I'm going to show you one more thing here because I did all this work of making the worm with the face, and since I'm not using it at the beginning, I would like to use it down here where we get into the shape tweening. And rather than have to cut that worm out and put a different one in, I could just simply go here, select it, go to Properties, and it shows me that it's an instance of the worm, but I'll swap it out with worm face, kind of like Scarface, but a worm instead. And then go over here, do the same thing again, click on them. Got the wrong thing selected here, so let me lock things. Okay, so by blocking or locking the fades, I was able to be able to click on the worm and select just it, graphic of worm, swap with worm with the face, and then if I really wanted to be super picky about this, I could go back here, make a copy of worm face, make worm face static, but heck, I'm not going to worry about it that much. So now when we go to shape tweening, we'll see the worm will show up here with no face, but once he starts moving, he gets a face. And that's appropriate face for that guy, I think. So here goes a walk through the entire timeline using just holding down the period key. So just in case there's anything in here not working right for you, you can kind of compare to mine, and of course use the pause key if you need to analyze something.